16 years old, and Daniel had mastered something most people never think about. He knew exactly how to become invisible. Not the magic kind you see in movies, but the real kind that happens in high school hallways every single day. Every morning started the same way. Daniel would walk through the front doors of Westfield High with his eyes fixed on the floor tiles. He had memorized every crack, every stain, every piece of gum that janitors had given up trying to scrape off. His backpack hung heavy on one shoulder, held together with silver duct tape that he had carefully applied 3 months ago when the zipper finally gave up. The hallways were always crowded. Kids laughing, shouting, showing each other things on their phones. Groups blocking the entire walkway while they talked about weekend plans. Couples holding hands. Athletes in their team jackets walking like they owned the place. And Daniel slipping between them all like water finding its way through rocks. He had his routes planned out. Take the long way to math class because the short way meant passing the popular kids' lockers. Use the back stairwell for third period even though it added 2 minutes to his walk. Timing was everything. Leave each class exactly 30 seconds after the bell so the hallways would already be crowded enough for him to blend in, but not so late that he'd be walking alone. His clothes were always clean. His mom made sure of that even though she worked 2 jobs and barely had time to sleep. But clean doesn't mean new. His jeans had faded patches at the knees. His shirts were mostly hand-me-downs from his older cousin. His sneakers had holes on the inside where his toes pressed against the fabric, but you couldn't see that from the outside, so it didn't matter. In class, Daniel sat in the second to last row. Never the last row because that's where the kids who wanted to sleep sat, and teachers always watched them. Never the front because that's where the eager students sat, the ones who always had their hands up. The second to last row was perfect. Close enough to see the board, far enough to fade into the background. He was smart, though. Really smart. His grades were mostly A's and B's, and he actually liked learning. Sometimes he'd know the answer when teachers asked questions. His hand would start to rise almost without him thinking about it, but then he'd catch himself. Look around at all the other students. Calculate the risk. And slowly he'd lower his hand back down because here's the thing about being invisible. Once you break the pattern, people notice. And when people notice, things can go very wrong. Daniel had learned that lesson 2 years ago when he was still new to the school. He'd answered a question in history class, a hard one that nobody else could get. The teacher had praised him, called him insightful. For about 10 seconds, Daniel had felt proud. Then he felt the stares. After class, 3 older kids had cornered him by the water fountain, called him a show-off, told him to watch himself. That was the day Daniel decided invisible was better than visible. Lunch was the hardest part of the day. The cafeteria was a minefield of social rules Daniel didn't understand. Who sat where mattered. What table you chose said everything about who you were. So Daniel had found a solution. The library was open during lunch. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, didn't mind if students ate there as long as they were quiet and cleaned up after themselves. So that's where Daniel spent his lunch periods. At a small table in the back corner, behind the reference section where nobody ever went anymore because everything was online now, he'd eat his sandwich. Usually peanut butter because it was cheap and didn't need to be kept cold. He'd do homework or read. Sometimes he'd just sit there and imagine what it would be like to have friends to sit with, to have someone save him a seat, to have inside jokes and weekend plans. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, though. Daniel had gotten used to that, the way you get used to a background noise that never stops. The worst part was feeling like he didn't matter, like he could disappear for real and nobody would notice. Teachers looked right through him. Other students stepped around him like he was a piece of furniture. Even when he did speak, people seemed surprised, as if they'd forgotten he could talk. His mom knew something was wrong. She'd ask him about school, about friends, about how things were going. Daniel would smile and say everything was fine. Because what was she supposed to do about it? She was already working herself to exhaustion just to pay rent and keep food on the table. His dad had left when Daniel was 8, and child support payments came randomly if they came at all. Adding his problems to her pile seemed cruel. At home, Daniel had his own world. He'd taught himself to code using free videos online. He was getting pretty good at it. In the digital world, nobody cared what you looked like or what you wore. Your code either worked or it didn't. It was fair in a way that high school never was. Sometimes he'd spend hours working on a project, and those were the times he felt almost happy, almost like he had a purpose. But every morning he had to close his laptop and return to the real world. put on his faded clothes, pack his duct-taped backpack, and head back to school. Back to being invisible. Back to walking through life like a ghost that nobody could quite see. Daniel had convinced himself that this was just how things were. That high school was something to survive, not enjoy. That in a few years he'd graduate and life would be different. Better. He just had to keep his head down and wait it out. He had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. That one decision, one moment of breaking his carefully constructed routine, would set off a chain of events that would force him to become visible, to be seen, to matter. Sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it pushes you into the spotlight whether you want it or not. And for Daniel, that push was coming very soon. It happened on a Tuesday. A cold, rainy Tuesday in late October, when the sky was the color of old concrete and the rain came down in sheets that turned the school parking lot into a maze of puddles. Daniel's routine was disrupted before the day even started. When he arrived at school, there was a sign on the library door. Closed for maintenance. Water damage from a leak in the ceiling. Would reopen tomorrow. He stood there staring at that sign, feeling his carefully organized world tilt sideways. The library was his safe place, his refuge. Where was he supposed to go during lunch? The morning classes dragged by. Daniel couldn't focus. He kept thinking about lunch period, about the cafeteria, about having to navigate that social battlefield he'd been avoiding for 2 years. Maybe he could eat in a bathroom stall. No, that was too depressing even for him. Maybe he could skip lunch entirely, just walk around outside in the rain. When the lunch bell rang, Daniel made a decision. He'd go to the cafeteria, find the most isolated table possible, eat quickly, get out, simple plan. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. The cafeteria hit him like a wall of noise the moment he walked in. Hundreds of conversations happening at once, trays clattering, chairs scraping. Someone's phone playing music too loud. The smell of whatever mystery meat they were serving mixed with the sharp scent of industrial floor cleaner. Daniel grabbed a tray and moved through the lunch line, keeping his eyes down. He already had his sandwich from home, but he grabbed an apple to make it look like he belonged there. At the register, he handed over his lunch card. The cashier barely looked at him, then came the hard part. Finding a place to sit. The cafeteria had an invisible map that everyone seemed to know except Daniel. The athletes sat near the windows. The honors students claimed the tables by the vending machines. The art kids took over the corner near the emergency exit, always covered in paint stains. Every group had their territory. Daniel spotted it. A small table in the far corner, partially hidden by a concrete support pillar. Only one person could really fit there comfortably. Perfect. He made his way across the cafeteria, weaving between tables, trying not to bump into anyone. He was almost there when someone's foot shot out. Daniel didn't see it until too late. His shoe caught and he stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of a table. His apple rolled across the floor. Laughter erupted around him. "Watch where you're going, man," someone said. But Daniel was already moving, leaving the apple. Just wanting to get to that corner table and disappear. He made it. Sat down. Put his backpack on the table as a kind of shield. Unwrapped his peanut butter sandwich with shaking hands. Just eat and get out. That was the plan. For about 5 minutes it worked. Daniel ate his sandwich in small bites, watching the chaos of the cafeteria from his corner. Nobody looked at him. Nobody bothered him. Maybe this would be okay after all. Then he heard the voice. Well, well, well. Look who decided to join the real world. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. Everyone knew that voice. Tyler Morrison stood at the edge of his table, flanked by 2 of his friends. Tyler was the kind of guy who peaked in high school and didn't know it yet. Star of the basketball team, dated the head cheerleader, had that easy confidence that came from never being told no. Tyler was also mean, not in the obvious bully way you see in movies, more subtle. He'd make comments that sounded almost like jokes, but with an edge that cut. He'd exclude people in ways that seemed accidental but never were. And for some reason Daniel had never understood, Tyler had decided Daniel was worth targeting. "Eating lunch all alone?" Tyler said, sliding into the seat across from Daniel without being invited. "That's sad, man. Really sad." Daniel didn't respond. Eye contact was engagement. Engagement was danger. He focused on his sandwich, trying to will himself back into invisibility. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Tyler's hand shot out and grabbed what was left of Daniel's sandwich right out of his hands. What is this? Tyler held it up like it was evidence in a trial. Peanut butter? Just peanut butter, no jelly? Dude, that's depressing. Tyler's friends laughed. One of them, a tall kid named Brett, leaned in. Maybe he can't afford jelly, is that it? Tyler asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. You too poor for jelly? Daniel's face burned. He reached for his sandwich, but Tyler pulled it back, holding it just out of reach. Say please, Tyler said. The conversations at nearby tables had stopped. People were watching now. Daniel could feel their eyes on him. This was exactly what he'd spent 2 years avoiding. Being the center of attention. Being the entertainment. Come on, just give it back, Daniel said quietly. What was that? Couldn't hear you. Tyler cupped his ear dramatically. Give it back, Daniel repeated louder this time, hating how his voice shook. Or what? Tyler stood up, holding the sandwich high above his head. What are you going to do about it? Daniel stood too, not because he had a plan, but because sitting felt worse. He was shorter than Tyler by at least 4 inches. Skinnier too. This was a confrontation he couldn't win, and everyone knew it. Tyler tossed the sandwich to Brett, who tossed it to the other friend, Jake. They were playing keep-away like Daniel was a little kid on the playground. Guys, come on, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. The sandwich sailed back to Tyler, who held it over a trash can. Oops, Butterfingers. Don't, Daniel said. Tyler grinned. Don't what? He was going to drop it. Daniel could see it in his eyes. This whole thing was about power, about humiliation, about making sure Daniel knew his place. Daniel grabbed his backpack, ready to just leave, to walk away and let them have their fun. He'd skip the rest of lunch, hide in a bathroom, whatever it took to end this, but then something happened that nobody expected. That's enough. The voice came from behind Daniel, deep, calm, with an authority that cut through the cafeteria noise. Everyone turned. A man in his mid-30s stood there holding a mop. He wore the dark blue uniform of the custodial staff, his name embroidered on the chest. Robert. Daniel had seen him around school, always cleaning, always working quietly in the background. Another invisible person, except right now, he wasn't invisible at all. Tyler recovered first, putting on his charming smile. Hey, Robert. We're just messing around. No big deal. Put the sandwich down, Robert said. It wasn't a request. Dude, chill. It's just a joke. Robert took a step closer. He wasn't particularly tall or muscular, but something in his posture, in the steadiness of his gaze, made Tyler hesitate. That young man's lunch belongs to him, Robert said. Not to you. Give it back and apologize. The cafeteria had gone quiet. This wasn't how these things usually went. Teachers sometimes intervened, but staff members? Custodians? They stayed in their lane. They didn't challenge the popular kids, but Robert wasn't backing down. Tyler looked around, suddenly aware of how many people were watching. His friends had gone quiet. The sandwich hung in his hand like evidence of guilt. Whatever, man. It's not that serious. Tyler dropped the sandwich on Daniel's table. It landed in a sad, squashed heap. Now apologize, Robert said. I'm not. Robert's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Tyler stop mid-sentence. Sorry, Tyler muttered, not looking at Daniel. Let's go. He and his friends left, trying to act like nothing had happened, like they'd chosen to leave rather than been driven away. The cafeteria slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed. The moment passed for everyone except Daniel, who stood there staring at his ruined sandwich, at this stranger who had done what nobody else ever had. Robert picked up his mop, then paused. You okay, son? Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. Good, Robert said. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Mind if I take my break here? Daniel stared at Robert, this custodian who had just pulled up a chair like they were old friends meeting for coffee. His mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. Nobody had ever stood up for him before. Not teachers, not other students, nobody. And now this man, this stranger who pushed a mop through the hallways, had faced down Tyler Morrison without flinching. I'm Daniel, he finally managed to say, his voice still shaky. Nice to officially meet you, Daniel, though I've seen you around. Robert pulled out a brown paper bag from his pocket and set it on the table. You eat your lunch yet, or did those clowns ruin it? Daniel looked at the sad, squashed sandwich on his tray. It's pretty much destroyed. Without a word, Robert opened his bag and pulled out a wrapped sandwich, an orange, and a bag of chips. He pushed half of it across the table to Daniel. Here, I packed extra today. My wife always says I pack too much. I can't take your lunch, Daniel protested. You're not taking it. I'm offering it. There's a difference. Robert unwrapped his half of the sandwich. Besides, I saw what happened. You didn't get to eat much. Growing kid like you needs food. Daniel hesitantly took the sandwich. It was turkey and cheese on wheat bread with lettuce and tomato, probably the best sandwich he'd seen in months. Thank you, he said quietly. They ate in silence for a minute. Daniel kept expecting Robert to get up and leave, to go back to work, but he stayed. Around them, the cafeteria continued its usual chaos, but at their little corner table, there was a bubble of calm. You know what I noticed about you? Robert said suddenly. Daniel looked up, confused. About me? Yeah. I've worked at this school for 3 years. I see a lot of students come and go. Most of them don't even notice I exist, but you always say good morning when you pass me in the hallway. You hold doors for people. Last week I saw you help Mrs. Chen pick up papers she dropped near the science lab. You didn't have to do that. Nobody was watching. But you did it anyway. Daniel felt his face grow warm. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed those things. They were just basic decency, weren't they? I also notice you're always alone, Robert continued, his voice gentle. And I see how you try to make yourself small, invisible, am I right? Daniel nodded slowly. There was no point in denying it. You want to know something? Robert leaned back in his chair. I was you. Exactly you. 20 years ago, different school, same story. Poor kid. Wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, ate lunch by myself, tried to disappear into the walls. Daniel found himself leaning forward, interested despite himself. Really? Really? I was convinced that being invisible was the safest option. If nobody saw me, nobody could hurt me. And I was right in a way. But you know what else happened? I missed everything. All the good stuff. The friendships, the experiences, the chances to figure out who I was. I was so busy hiding that I forgot to live. But what if... Daniel struggled to find the words. What if when people do see you, they're like Tyler? What if being visible just means being a target? Robert was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. That's a fair point. And yeah, there are people like Tyler out there. People who try to make themselves feel big by making others feel small. But here's what I learned. Those people, they only have power if you're alone. They pick on isolated kids because there's nobody around to call them out. But I am alone, Daniel said, the words coming out more bitter than he intended. You were alone. Robert corrected. Past tense. Right now you're having lunch with me, and I'm going to let you in on a secret. There are more people like me at this school than there are like Tyler. Good people who would be your friend if you gave them the chance, but they can't be your friend if they don't know you exist. Daniel picked at his sandwich. It's not that easy. Never said it was easy. Said it was worth it. Robert finished his half of the sandwich and started on the orange, peeling it with practiced ease. You know what else I noticed about you? You're smart. Really smart. I've seen your test scores posted on the honor roll. You're in advanced classes. You have potential, Daniel. But potential doesn't mean anything if you're too afraid to let anyone see it. I'm not afraid, Daniel said automatically. Then stopped. That was a lie and they both knew it. Okay, maybe I am. But being afraid keeps me safe. Safe from what, though? Safe from living? Safe from being happy? Robert offered Daniel half of his orange. Look, I'm not saying you should walk into school tomorrow and suddenly become the most popular kid here. That's not realistic, and honestly, popularity is overrated. But maybe you could try being a little less invisible. Maybe you could sit in the cafeteria sometimes instead of hiding in the library. How did you know about the library? Robert smiled. I clean it every afternoon. I see your usual spot. The table behind the reference section. You're there every day, same time, same place. Like clockwork. Daniel felt exposed, like his secret hiding place had been discovered. But Robert's expression wasn't judgmental. It was understanding. There's nothing wrong with the library, Robert continued. I love the library. But it shouldn't be a hiding place. It should be a choice. You see the difference? Daniel did see the difference, even if he didn't want to admit it. Tell you what, Robert said, checking his watch. I've got to get back to work. But I eat lunch in the cafeteria most days. Usually at this table, actually. You're welcome to join me anytime. No pressure. But the offer stands. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Daniel asked suddenly. The question had been building in his mind, and it burst out before he could stop it. "You don't know me. Why do you care?" Robert stood up, collecting his trash. He looked at Daniel for a long moment, and there was something sad and understanding in his eyes. "Because when I was your age, I needed someone to care, and nobody did. I spent 3 years of high school completely alone, thinking that's just how my life would be. And then one day a teacher noticed me, really noticed me, Mr. Patterson. He taught history and he saw something in me I didn't see in myself. He started talking to me after class, encouraging me, believing in me. That man changed my life." Robert put his hand on Daniel's shoulder, a brief fatherly gesture. "Mr. Patterson passed away 5 years ago. Cancer." At his funeral, there were dozens of former students all telling stories about how he'd changed their lives, how he'd seen them when nobody else did. And I realized that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that person for someone else. Daniel felt tears prickling at his eyes and blinked them back hard. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Daniel. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You think you're nobody? You think you don't matter? You're wrong. You matter to me, and you'd matter to a lot of other people too if you gave them the chance to know you." Robert picked up his mop. "Think about what I said. And if you want to talk more, I'm around. I work the early shift, so I'm here until 3 every day. Room 118 is where I take my breaks if you ever need to find me." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and Daniel? What Tyler did today? That wasn't about you. People like him, they're dealing with their own problems. Hurt people hurt people. Don't let his issues become your issues. You're better than that." With that, Robert walked back into the cafeteria crowd, mop in hand, becoming just another worker doing his job. But to Daniel, he would never be just another worker again. Daniel sat there for the rest of lunch period thinking about everything Robert had said. The cafeteria buzzed around him, but for the first time, it didn't feel quite so threatening. He watched groups of students laughing together, and instead of feeling excluded, he wondered what it would be like to be part of a group like that. At a nearby table, he noticed a girl sitting alone, reading a book. She looked as uncomfortable as he usually felt. Before today, he would have seen her as just another person to avoid. But now he wondered about her story. Was she choosing to sit alone, or was she hiding too? The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Daniel gathered his things, threw away his trash, and headed to his next class. But something had shifted inside him. A tiny seed of possibility had been planted. Maybe being invisible wasn't the only way to be safe. Maybe there was another option he'd been too afraid to consider. Maybe, just maybe, being seen wouldn't be the end of the world. As Daniel walked through the hallway, he found himself standing a little straighter. Not much. Just enough that when someone accidentally made eye contact with him, he didn't immediately look away. It was a small change. Tiny, really. But sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest steps. And for Daniel, this was the first step of a journey he didn't even know he was about to take. The next morning, Daniel woke up before his alarm. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling of his small room, thinking about the business card Robert had pressed into his hand as lunch period ended yesterday. The card was simple, just black text on white cardstock. Riverside Community Center, Youth Mentorship Program. There was a phone number and an email address. Daniel had looked it up last night on his phone. The program matched high school students with mentors who helped with everything from homework to college applications to just having someone to talk to. It was free, run by volunteers, and met twice a week after school. The old Daniel would have thrown the card away. Would have convinced himself it was some kind of charity program for troubled kids, and he wasn't troubled, just quiet. But something about yesterday had cracked open a door in his mind, and now he couldn't quite close it again. At school, Daniel found himself doing something different. Instead of taking his usual route to first period, he walked past the main office. Through the window, he could see Robert emptying trash cans, methodically working his way through the administrative area. Robert looked up, saw Daniel, and smiled. Just a small smile, a brief acknowledgement, but it was enough to make Daniel feel like he wasn't completely alone in this massive building. In English class, something unusual happened. Mrs. Brennan was discussing symbolism in the book they were reading, and she asked a question about what the broken clock in Chapter 7 might represent. Hands shot up around the room. The usual students, the ones who always participated, Daniel knew the answer. He'd actually thought a lot about that clock while reading. It wasn't just about time stopping. It was about how the main character was stuck, unable to move forward, living in the past. The clock was broken because he was broken. His hand started to rise. Old instincts kicked in, telling him to put it down, to stay silent, to stay safe. But then he thought about Robert's words, about being invisible versus being unseen, about potential that meant nothing if nobody ever saw it. Daniel raised his hand. Mrs. Brennan looked surprised. In 3 months of class, he'd never volunteered an answer. Yes, Daniel. I think the broken clock represents how the main character is stuck in time, Daniel said, his voice quiet but steady. He can't move forward because he's trapped by his past. The clock stopped at the exact moment his life changed, and he's been living in that moment ever since, even though years have passed. The classroom was silent. Mrs. Brennan smiled slowly. That's exactly right, Daniel. And you've added something I hadn't even considered, about being trapped in a specific moment. That's brilliant literary analysis. A few students turned to look at him. Not hostile looks, curious ones. Like they were seeing him for the first time and wondering who he was. After class, a girl named Lucy stopped him in the hallway. She was in his English class, sat 2 rows over. Daniel had noticed her before because she always had a different book with her, always reading between classes. Hey, that was really smart what you said about the clock, Lucy said. I didn't think about it that way at all. Thanks, Daniel managed, caught off guard by the interaction. You're Daniel, right? We've been in class together all semester, but I don't think we've ever actually talked. Yeah, I'm Daniel. There was a slightly awkward pause. Lucy shifted her backpack. Well, anyway, I just wanted to say good job. See you in class. She walked away, and Daniel stood there processing what had just happened. A normal conversation. A compliment, recognition. Was it really that simple? At lunch, Daniel made a decision. Instead of heading to the corner table, he walked straight to where Robert sat. The custodian looked up from his sandwich and grinned. There he is. Glad you came back. I thought about what you said, Daniel told him, sitting down. About not being alone. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe I've been hiding. Daniel pulled out his lunch, a peanut butter sandwich again, but today he'd added jelly, a small rebellion against yesterday's humiliation. I looked up that mentorship program. The one on the card you gave me. Robert's eyes lit up. Yeah, what did you think? I think I want to try it. But I'm nervous. What if I don't fit in? What if it's weird? It'll probably be a little weird at first, Robert admitted. New things usually are. But weird isn't the same as bad. And you know what? I volunteer there. I'm one of the mentors. Have been for 2 years now. Daniel felt relief wash over him. Having a familiar face there made the idea less terrifying. Tell you what, Robert said. Session is tonight at 6. I'll meet you there. You won't be walking in alone, deal? Deal. They ate lunch together, and Robert told Daniel more about his own high school experience. How he'd graduated barely noticed by anyone. How he'd struggled to figure out what to do with his life. How he'd worked a series of dead-end jobs before finally finding purpose in helping others. I'm not rich, Robert said. Never will be. I push a mop for a living, and that's okay. But you know what I've got? I've got purpose. I've got people who matter to me and who I matter to. That's worth more than any paycheck. Do you ever regret it? Daniel asked. Not going to college or getting some big career? Robert considered this. Sometimes. When my back hurts from mopping floors or when I'm cleaning up someone's mess in a bathroom. But then I think about kids like you. Kids I've been able to help, even in small ways. And I think, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The afternoon classes passed in a blur. Daniel found himself actually paying attention, actually engaging. In math, he worked through a problem on the board. In history, he contributed to a group discussion. Each time was a little easier than the last. After school, Daniel went home to the empty apartment. His mom wouldn't be back until almost 8. She was working the evening shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, then heading to her second job cleaning offices downtown. Daniel heated up leftovers from 2 nights ago and tried to do homework, but he couldn't focus. At 5:30, he left for the community center. It was a 15-minute walk from his apartment, through a neighborhood that had seen better days but was slowly being revitalized. The center itself was a converted church, brick and stone with large windows. Robert was waiting outside, as promised. Right on time, Robert said. You ready? I guess so. Inside, the community center was warm and welcoming. The walls were covered with artwork from local kids, photos of community events, bulletin boards full of opportunities and resources. There was a faint smell of coffee and old books. Robert led Daniel to a large room in the back where about 15 teenagers were gathered, along with several adults. Some kids were doing homework at tables. Others were playing chess or cards. A few were just talking and laughing. "Everyone," Robert called out, getting their attention. "This is Daniel. He's new to the program." A chorus of hellos greeted him, no judgment in their eyes. "Just welcome." A woman in her 40s approached, smiling warmly. "Hi, Daniel, I'm Patricia. I coordinate the program. Robert told me you might be joining us. Welcome." Over the next 2 hours, Daniel experienced something he'd almost forgotten: community. He met other students from different schools, each with their own stories. Some were dealing with problems that made his seem small. Others were just looking for somewhere to belong. He was paired with Robert as his official mentor, which was a relief. They sat together and Robert helped Daniel map out a plan. What were his goals? What did he want to achieve? What was holding him back? "I want to stop being invisible," Daniel said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. "Then let's figure out how to make that happen," Robert replied. They talked about small steps, joining one club or activity, making one new friend, raising his hand in class more often, applying for a part-time job to help his mom with bills and build confidence, looking into scholarships and college prep programs. On the walk home, Daniel felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight he'd been carrying had been redistributed, spread across more shoulders so he didn't have to bear it alone. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Lucy from English. Mrs. Brennan gave me your number, hope that's okay. There's a book club that meets at the public library on Thursdays. Thought you might be interested. Let me know if you want details." Daniel stared at the text. A week ago, this would have terrified him. Someone reaching out, an invitation to something social. His first instinct was to decline, to make an excuse. But that door in his mind that had cracked open yesterday was wider now. Wide enough to see possibilities beyond his small, safe world. He typed back, "Yeah, I'd like that. Thanks for thinking of me." 3 dots appeared showing Lucy was typing. Then "Cool. I'll send you the info," Daniel smiled. An actual, genuine smile that felt strange on his face because it had been so long since he'd had reason to use one. When he got home, he sat at his small desk and pulled out Robert's business card, placing it where he could see it every day, a reminder that things could change, that he could change. That being seen wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. His mom came home at 8:30, exhausted as always. But when she saw Daniel's face, something in her expression shifted. "You look different," she said. "Something good happened today?" "Yeah, Mom, something really good." Daniel hugged her, surprising both of them. "I think things are going to be okay." She hugged him back tight. "They were always going to be okay, baby. I just wish I could be around more to help you see that." "You do enough," Daniel told her. "More than enough. But I think I needed to learn how to help myself too." That night, Daniel didn't code. Instead, he made a list. Not of things to avoid or ways to stay invisible. A list of possibilities. A list of things he wanted to try. A list of the person he wanted to become. And at the top of that list, in clear, bold letters, he wrote, "Be seen. Be brave. Be myself." 3 months later, Daniel walked through the front doors of Westfield High, and everything was different. Not the building. Not the students rushing through the hallways. Not the same tired posters on the bulletin boards or the smell of floor wax and teenage anxiety. Those things were exactly the same. What was different was Daniel. He walked with his head up. Not in an arrogant way, but in a way that said he had a right to be there, to take up space, to exist. His backpack was still held together with duct tape, but he'd added patches and pins he'd collected from the community center. His clothes were still hand-me-downs, but he wore them differently now, with a confidence that had nothing to do with brand names. "Hey, Daniel," a voice called from down the hall. He turned to see Lucy jogging toward him, her usual stack of books under one arm. They'd become real friends over the past few months. Book club on Thursdays had become his favorite part of the week, a group of 6 students who met at the library to talk about whatever they were reading. "You ready for the English test?" Lucy asked, falling into step beside him. "As ready as I'll ever be. You?" I'm going to fail the essay portion, she said dramatically. I can't analyze symbolism to save my life. You'll be fine. Remember what we talked about at book club? Just think about what the author wants you to feel, not just what they want you to know. Lucy grinned. Look at you giving advice. Remember when you barely talked in September? Daniel remembered. It felt like a lifetime ago. That version of himself seemed like a stranger now, someone he used to know but had outgrown. They passed Tyler in the hallway. He was with his usual group, laughing too loud at something on someone's phone. Tyler glanced at Daniel, and for a second their eyes met. Daniel didn't look away. He just nodded, a simple acknowledgement. Tyler looked away first. That was another thing that had changed. Tyler had left him alone since the cafeteria incident. Word had gotten around about Robert's intervention, and somehow that had shifted something in the school's social ecosystem. Daniel wasn't a target anymore. He was just another student. In English class, Mrs. Brennan returned their graded essays. Daniel got his back with a large A- at the top and a note, "Excellent analysis. You've really come into your own this semester." He had. His grades, already good, had gotten better. Not because he was smarter, but because he wasn't spending all his energy trying to be invisible anymore. That energy had been freed up for actually learning. At lunch, Daniel sat at a table with Robert, Lucy, and 2 other students from the mentorship program. Kevin was a junior who wanted to be an engineer. Alicia was a freshman who wrote poetry and was funnier than she had any right to be. They were a mismatched group, but it worked. So the regional science fair is in 2 weeks, Kevin said, picking at his cafeteria pizza. I'm thinking about entering my water filtration project. You definitely should, Daniel encouraged. That thing is incredible. You could win. Or I could embarrass myself in front of hundreds of people. Or you could win, Alicia repeated firmly. Confidence, Kevin. We talked about this. Robert watched the conversation with a small smile, not saying much, just letting them be teenagers together. Sometimes Daniel caught him with that expression, proud and a little sad at the same time, like he was watching something beautiful that he knew wouldn't last forever. After lunch, Daniel had a free period. Instead of spending it in the library like he used to, he went to room 214 where the coding club met. He joined 6 weeks ago, hesitant at first, but it had become one of his favorite things. There were 8 of them now, working on a group project to build a website for local small businesses. Daniel, thank God, said Chris, the club president. I've been fighting with the CSS for an hour. Can you take a look? Daniel pulled up a chair and looked at the code on the screen. Within 5 minutes, he'd found the problem and fixed it. You're a genius, Chris said. Seriously, where did you learn all this? Self-taught mostly. YouTube videos and practice. We should enter the regional tech competition, another member, Priya, suggested. With Daniel's skills and Chris's design sense, we could actually place. The old Daniel would have deflected, would have made excuses, would have hidden his abilities. The new Daniel said, yeah, let's do it. Could be fun. After school, Daniel didn't go straight to the community center. He had somewhere else to be first. He'd gotten a part-time job at a local coffee shop 3 weeks ago, working weekday afternoons and Saturday mornings. The owner, Mrs. Lynn, had hired him on the spot after he'd nervously handed her a resume Robert had helped him write. The job wasn't glamorous. He made minimum wage, cleaned tables, washed dishes, learned to make basic drinks. But the money helped his mom, and more than that, it gave him purpose. Customers started to recognize him, learned his name, asked how school was going. He was becoming part of the community. Today, Mrs. Lynn pulled him aside during his shift. Daniel, I've been impressed with your work. You're reliable, you're kind to customers, and you learn quickly. I want to teach you the register. It means a small raise, really? Thank you, Mrs. Lynn. You've earned it. She paused. You know, when you first came in here, you could barely look me in the eye. Now look at you, standing tall. Whatever you've been doing these past few months, keep doing it. After work, Daniel headed to the community center. Tonight was special. They were having an open house, and Daniel had been asked to speak about his experience in the program. The idea terrified him, but in a good way. The kind of fear that meant he was growing. The room was packed with parents, potential new students, school administrators, and local community leaders. Daniel stood at the front, note cards in his shaking hands, looking out at all those faces. Robert gave him a thumbs up from the back of the room. Daniel took a deep breath and began. 3 months ago, I was invisible. Not literally, but close enough. I spent 2 years trying to disappear, thinking that if nobody saw me, nobody could hurt me. I ate lunch alone. I didn't have friends. I thought that's just how my life was going to be. He looked up from his notes and found his voice getting stronger. Then one day, someone saw me. Really saw me. A custodian named Robert stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. And then he did something even more important. He didn't just defend me and walk away. He stayed. He talked to me. He invited me here to this program. Daniel could see people leaning forward, engaged. This place changed my life, not because they gave me money or fixed all my problems. They didn't. My mom still works 2 jobs. I still wear old clothes. We still struggle sometimes. But what they gave me was something more valuable. They gave me community. They gave me people who believed in me before I believed in myself. He shared specifics, how the program helped him apply for scholarships, how his mentor Robert worked with him on college essays, how just having somewhere to go after school, somewhere he belonged, made everything else bearable. I'm not invisible anymore, Daniel concluded. And the weird thing is, nothing external really changed. I'm still the same person. But I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not afraid anymore, and that's made all the difference. The room erupted in applause. Daniel's face flushed, but he smiled. A real, genuine smile. Afterward, several people approached him. A school counselor who wanted to talk about expanding the program. A parent whose son reminded her of Daniel. A local business owner who wanted to sponsor scholarships. But the moment that mattered most came when a kid, maybe 14, nervous and small, approached him hesitantly. "Hey, I'm Alex," the kid said. I heard what you said about being invisible. That's exactly how I feel at school." Daniel recognized that look in Alex's eyes. The fear, the loneliness, the desperate hope that things could be different. "It can get better," Daniel told him. "I promise it can. Are you thinking about joining the program? Maybe. I'm scared. That's okay. I was scared too. But you know what? Being scared means you're about to do something brave. And brave is always better than invisible." Alex smiled, small but real. "Thanks, that helps." As Alex walked away to talk to Patricia about enrolling, Robert appeared at Daniel's side. "You did good up there," Robert said. "Really good. I was terrified, I know. But you did it anyway. That's courage." Robert put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You remember that first day we talked? In the cafeteria? I told you that you mattered. Do you believe it now?" Daniel thought about the question. 3 months ago, he would have said no immediately. He would have deflected, would have argued, would have rejected the idea that he had value. "Yeah," Daniel said now. "I do, I really do." "Good, because you do matter, Daniel. Not just to me or to your mom or to your friends. You matter, period. Your voice matters. Your ideas matter. Your presence in the world makes it better." Daniel felt tears prickling at his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. "Thank you, Robert. For everything. For seeing me when nobody else did. I didn't make you visible, Daniel. You were always there. I just reminded you of that. Everything else? That was all you." A month later, Daniel stood in the school auditorium during an assembly. The principal was announcing awards for the semester. Academic excellence, perfect attendance, community service. And finally, Principal Henderson said, adjusting her microphone, "We have a new award this year. The Rising Star Award, given to a student who has shown exceptional growth, not just academically but personally, a student who embodies the spirit of perseverance and positive change." Daniel wasn't paying much attention. He was sitting with Lucy and Kevin, whispering about weekend plans. This semester's recipient started the year as someone many of us didn't know. Principal Henderson continued. "But through dedication, courage, and the support of our community, he has become an example of what's possible when we believe in ourselves. The Rising Star Award goes to Daniel Chen." For a second, Daniel didn't move. Surely he'd heard wrong. Lucy elbowed him. "That's you, go!" In a daze, Daniel stood and walked down the aisle. The entire auditorium was applauding. He looked around and saw faces he recognized. Teachers who had started calling on him in class. Students he'd helped with homework. Mrs. Lynn from the coffee shop. Patricia from the community center. And in the back, standing and clapping harder than anyone, was Robert. Tears streaming down his face, smiling so wide it must have hurt, Daniel accepted the award, a plaque with his name on it. Principal Henderson shook his hand. "Would you like to say anything?" Daniel looked out at the auditorium. 3 months ago, this would have been his worst nightmare. Being seen by everyone, being the center of attention. Now it felt right. "Thank you," he said into the microphone. "This means a lot. I want to thank the people who helped me get here. My mom, who works harder than anyone I know. My friends, who accepted me even when I was still figuring out how to accept myself. The mentorship program at Riverside Community Center, and especially Robert, the custodian you probably walk past every day without noticing." He found Robert in the crowd. "Robert taught me that being invisible isn't the same as being safe. That hiding from the world means missing out on everything good it has to offer, and that we all matter even when we don't believe it ourselves." More applause. Daniel walked back to his seat, but he didn't sit down the way he used to. Hunched, small, trying to disappear. He sat with his back straight, his head up, taking up space without apology. After the assembly, Daniel found Robert in the hallway. "You made me cry in front of the whole school," Robert said, wiping his eyes and laughing. "Thanks a lot. You deserve the recognition." "No, Daniel. You did. This was always about you finding your own strength. I just pointed you in the right direction." They stood there for a moment. Custodian and student, mentor and friend. Two people who had both learned that being seen was scary and wonderful and absolutely worth it. "What are you going to do now?" Robert asked. "You've got momentum. Don't waste it." Daniel thought about it. About college applications he was starting to fill out. About scholarships he was applying for. About the life that was opening up before him, full of possibilities he'd never let himself imagine before. "I'm going to keep going," Daniel said. "Keep growing. Keep being visible. And someday I want to be like you. I want to help other kids who feel invisible. I want to be the person who sees them." Robert smiled. "You're already doing that, Daniel. You just don't realize it yet." That night, Daniel walked home through the city streets. He didn't take the back alleys or shortcuts anymore. He walked on the main roads, past shops and restaurants, past people living their lives. A homeless man sat on a corner, cup in front of him, invisible to the crowds rushing past. Daniel stopped, pulled out $3 from his tip money and placed it in the cup. "Thank you," the man said, surprised to be acknowledged. "You're welcome," Daniel replied. "Have a good night." Because that was another thing Daniel had learned. Invisible people existed everywhere. On street corners, in school hallways, in every community. People who had convinced themselves they didn't matter, that nobody saw them. And sometimes all it took was one person to say, "I see you. You matter." Daniel kept walking, his head up, his stride confident. He passed his reflection in a store window and barely recognized himself. Same face, same clothes. But everything else was different. He was no longer the boy who tried to disappear. He was Daniel Chen, student, friend, employee, mentee, someone who mattered, someone who walked proud. And as he turned the corner toward home, where his mom would be waiting with dinner and stories about her day, Daniel smiled. Because he'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can't choose whether other people see you, but you can choose to see yourself. You can choose to believe you matter. You can choose to walk through the world like you have every right to be here, because you do. Everyone does. And that simple truth, that fundamental recognition of human worth, changes everything.